Colleagues, welcome to the very final session of Human Choice and Computers, 12th edition. The format of this final session is quite simple. I'm going to light the blue touch paper and stand back as Simon delivers us a provocation.
They're taking pictures at the provocateur.
And then I'm going to invite members of the panel, come and join us, Diane, to make a brief response, and then my wonderful PhD students will come round with the microphones so that you also can make some response. So, without further ado, Simon, please.
Very good.
Why did you turn that off? That was the
Maybe
best part.
He went to my school.
You've got to figure out which on the audience looks like the purple guy with a big stomach.
Careful.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Over the last few days, I've heard a lot of people talk. A lot of people sort of talking about the advocacy of digital beings. We've heard both keynote speakers talk to us about these sorts of issues. They've shared with us concepts such as embodiment, collectives, body and mind, merging together, Internet of Bodies, all those sorts of things. And I'm quite interested to see, how much of this sort of stuff, is it just about the evangelists about pushing these things forward, or has this concept of digital existence really come into the psyche of everybody? Are we accepting it? Are we accepting it across the society at large? So I want to have a meander through bits of evidence to see whether that is the case, or whether it's just us here at this wonderful conference talking about these things, and whether things have moved forward at all. If that's a good thing or a bad thing, we can think about that later on. So, my meanderings are going to cover two perspectives. The first one is to do with the cultural artifact view, which is where technological product has been developed, it's marketed, it's rolled out, used by people, and that's a very traditional way about how we look at technology. And then as you move to the cultural view, which is about a virtual place where people form and reform practices, meanings, how they operate, how they live, how they exist. And it seems that as you move from the first perspective to the second, so the human technology intimacy seems to increase. And so what I want to do first of all is just to use myself and what my current sort of role is in academia as by way of a case study. And it's to do with the fact that many of you know that I'm the editor of the Journal for Information, Communication and Ethics in Society, and there's a flyer in your bags about that, and there's some access to some of the papers which are relevant to this conference. You'll find that, and you can have a look at those later on, and some of the things linked certainly to some of the things that many of you have been talking about over the last few days. Now, this journal started in 2003, and it's a story about moving from the physical to the virtual. We started the journal with a local publisher, Troubadour. At that time, I was based in Leicester, and the publishing house, small independent publishing house, based in Leicester, and it was about a dialogue between us and the publishers, face to face, and we produced a paper-based journal, 2003. From that time, there has been a move. We've gone from that very simplistic way of actually publishing to things where we started to use email and teleconferencing, but it was still paper-based journal. Then we moved to electronic submission and an editing system, and then the marriage of electronic and physical paper-based publications, which has been around for quite some time. And about 18 months ago, Emerald decided that they would remove the paper. And so, like many journals, academic journals across the world, now the journal is only available electronically. And the next thing that's happening is we're now moving from the concept of a volume with issues, we're moving to the publication of an academic paper. So this whole concepts that we used in the physical world have changed to one in a virtual world. And that certainly is a story of evolution which reflects technological advances and social acceptance. So what we've got today, and it is very much in terms of academic publishing, is an exemplar of human technology intimacy, in my view. Research data, journal choice, submission and publication are all technologically dependent. And what's interesting about this change and this increase in this intimacy between us and the technology is that how we build trusting relationships across that network related to academic publishing is done through our digital selves. And just remember that phrase, digital selves, because that is really important. And trusting relationships in the physical world would rely heavily upon non-verbal cues. You're looking at me and you're thinking, this guy's a complete idiot, or this guy's saying something really interesting here. And I can see some of you are laughing and some of you aren't, so I now know which agree with the firmer and which don't. And it's all about non-verbal cues, body language, and tactile interaction. And that's really important. But in the online world, I mean, even though we heard some very interesting things about performing arts yesterday, in the online world, those cues really rarely exist. And so therefore academic publishing, which is now an online virtual activity, really, is exposed to a breakdown in those trusting relationships. And that's really significant. Now, if we're going to make this thing work in terms of academic publishing, I, as an editor, have to embrace this stuff, and I have to have a digital persona. And what's been happening in terms of Emerald over the last sort of 12 months or so is that they've been embracing various social media. And so now our journal has links into LinkedIn, Orchid, Twitter, Kudos. So that's the first level. But in order to actually get this legitimacy and make our journal visible, then it's also linked to other things which relate to me with my digital persona in academia.edu, in Wikipedia, in ResearchGate. And further out, it actually appears in Google Scholar. So you've got this visibility, which if you don't have that visibility now in academic publishing, you don't. Your journal, your academic journal, doesn't flourish, it doesn't survive, and that means you'll not get any of people like you submitting to our journal so that you can get your citation index up. So the world has changed dramatically. So let's just consider for a moment then what this concept of digital being is about. And let me just share with you four ideas from various eminent authors, which gives us an idea of the complexity. The first one, technology works as a transparent extension of ourselves, of minds and bodies. And then this Heidegger idea of a design, where a human body is a whole rather than a compound of the mind and body. And Spencer and Scar she goes on to say that actually, whereas Heidegger said it was a linear time frame, that's changed in the virtual world. And so humans as designs have the ability to present, albeit virtually, in a geographically boundless landscape, in near instant time for eternity within fluid space. I'm here forever. Now, you should be applauding that, not looking at, oh, thank you. And as designs, we can encounter others in the virtual world, and so fundamentally, it changes the ways in which we're going to interact. And we heard some of that stuff yesterday from Ghislaine. And so what we now have is we have two forms of anatomy, as I see it. I mean, I'm standing here, I've got my physical anatomy, and you've all got your physical anatomy, but data now is our virtual anatomy. And that's important. So data selves, virtual anatomy. Hang on to those two ideas. So this digital being, couple of further things to think about, avatars, and they've been mentioned in a few places. A few examples of strange avatars here. Who does the bottom picture remind you of? I don't know. Anyway, so the idea that the avatar is a digital being in the World Wide Web, made up of binary digits. So it's very much a virtual identity. Self-expression formed by a combination of textual communication and graphics. And these sorts of things are becoming part and parcel of many people's everyday lives. Avatars collaborate in the pursuit of a civil society, which is interesting. So suddenly we're getting different sorts of communications via this in this virtual world of how we operate as human beings. And indeed, all you need is a keyboard and a screen, and you can enter the online virtual world of endless possibilities, without doubt. Now, okay, so that's a bit about, this virtual world that now sort of exists in this way. And the question is, how far has this been absorbed into the everyday lives of ordinary people, or is it still just some sort of silo or some sort of clique and people who are interested in this thing? I think we can get a sense of how far this has become absorbed if we look at media coverage and the sorts of changes and extensions in our vocabulary that we use on a day-to-day basis to see whether or not these things are starting to be seen as the norm. I looked at the Daily Mail, which is a middle market tabloid in the UK. Second highest circulation in the UK, and what's interesting is, whether you agree with the Daily Mail or not, I can see something like, why has he picked the Daily Mail? But that's, Daily Mail is read by lots of ordinary people. 100 million unique visits every month onto their website. And here's just a few headlines from things across time. 1998 was just at the beginning of the World Wide Web. And there we see a headline which is talking about the advance of technology in the world. 2001, you start to see that it's talking about using the web and the online world in leisure activities, but also starting to think about the fact that we need some social control. 2007, here we've got 3 examples of things that happen in the real world. They have their virtual equivalents. Political campaigning, the idea of bullying people, the idea of this virtual utopia, and how you live out your lives. So the real world by 2007 has got its virtual equivalents. And then the idea of 2008, this title here is about the fact that we're starting to include many more and more people in terms of using and accessing the online world. And then finally, the one in 2015 is an example of how it's becoming a complete experience rather than one which is just driven by text. And we heard some of those things yesterday about that you were talking about. So I would put it to you that such stories influence the perception of technology and how it's embedded into our lives and what is considered to be social norms and the sorts of language that's used within those sorts of stories. Cyber, Google, Skype, blog. These are words which didn't exist in 1996. So these are being used on a regular basis. And as this sort of vocabulary is used in the popular press, it promotes usage, leads to widespread adoption, and in turn influences social norms. But how do we use the vocabulary? I did a Google search on some everyday words and some words and phrases which describe the online virtual world. And the size of the letters reflects, you know, the ranking in terms of where those words appeared. The interesting thing about it was that activities which mimic established activities, such as communicating, writing, searching, they all rank well. Technological concepts such as augmented reality, virtual reality rank less, which suggests that they're not so well understood by the public at large. And finally, those which relate to the extension of the person, digital persona, digital being, cyber citizen, they ranked at the bottom, which suggests that they represent controversial, complex concepts which currently remain primarily within the realms of research. But already you can see that everyday words like home and house, that they have the same sort of occurrence as things like Facebook and World Wide Web, email. So this vocabulary is being used right across the population in a whole variety of ways. And this is further illustrated by antimeria, which is how you turn nouns into verbs. So now we can actually do the action of Skyping. We can spam people. We can surf the net. We can Google. You know, we all say, well, we need to Google that. You know, this is part of our vocabulary, and we all know what that means. Would you have known what that meant in 1996? No, you wouldn't. No idea. And we tweet. So we're not a bunch of birds, but we tweet people. In fact, we've been tweeting on there. I don't know whether anybody's putting down, this guy's a load of... Does it say this guy's a load of rubbish? I don't know, maybe not. And we email to email. So these things have turned into actions rather than just a technology. The same as it was in the 1920s when Hoover, which is a vacuum cleaner, and is still today, certainly in the UK, you hoover the carpet, and that was a brand of vacuum cleaner, and so it became a verb. So, we have this online world continuum, and what we have is, it ranges from, at the one end is this cultural artifact, which is the perspective which I talked about at the beginning, through to this more complex world of this cultural perspective. A carpenter has a favourite hammer, a cook has a favourite pan, a painter has a favourite brush, and a cleaner has a favourite mop. And just like those artisans, we all have our favourite search engine, we all have our favourite browser. And such tools of affection are at one end of this continuum, they're tools. And as you go along that continuum, you then become into the virtual world with a deeper intimacy in terms of human and technology, where human and technology are integrated. Digital existence is played out through, for example, designs as avatars, which is what I mentioned earlier on. So we are a different sort of world, a more sophisticated, as technology becomes more sophisticated, the experience is extended and intimacy increases. These experiences change our perception of self, place, actions and belongings. Acceptance of technology evolution is affected certainly by mass media and the vocabulary that is used to describe both, that describes these technologies both in the press and by us as individuals. And I think because of that, because of this change of this relationship between technology and humans, we now need to start to rethink or revisit some fundamental issues. And I'll just leave you with 5 of these things, which I think is probably a good place where people can start discussing. The first one is that we now need to accept that we are composite beings. It isn't just about our physical. I mean, we've heard lots of things talked about that over the last few days, and we now need to think what that actually means. I have a real problem in this new world that we live in, that the sorts of things that we talk in terms of legislation, we talk about data subjects. We are not data subjects in terms of personal data. We are our data selves. And that changes the way that we start to think about regulation if you talk about our data selves rather than being data subjects. It changes, it flips it round. And so and then if you buy into that, and I know some people have done some papers about that in the last few days, then it seems to me that we need to ensure that our virtual autonomy should not and cannot be owned by third parties. Now, how you arrive at that is quite difficult. And we need to be able to establish this concept of relationship and trusting relationships without all those visual cues that we're so used to and how we operate as a human race. And maybe one of the things that we need to think about is some fundamental things of social scaffolding, things like the Declaration of Human Rights, which was written a long, long time ago before the world of technology existed. And maybe what we need to think about is revisiting those, seeing whether they're still applicable. Do we need to reinterpret those things in some way? That is 5 bullet points, which is a huge agenda, which would keep people thinking for quite some time. Why is it important? Well, quite simply. Digital beings, the modern way to be, I am the data, and the data is me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. It's fantastic.